Hey everyone, this time we read Shadow of the Colossus by Nick Suttner. I really enjoyed this book. It was one of those that Boss Fight Books puts out that just really pulled me into it. What I like about them is everyone is a little bit different. This is definitely one of the ones that I just absolutely fell in love with. I could not stop reading it. I really enjoyed this book. I cannot stress that enough. So we start off with a little bit of history of the game. We talk about its development. We talk about the game that the team did before this, which was called Ico. And we talk about how those games were a little bit different from the games that were being released at the time. Shadow of the Colossus its development reminds me a lot of Katamari Damacy, in that it wasn't the same as every other game that was being put out at the time. It just sort of broke away from what other people were doing. In this case, you didn't have a lot of constant action. You had a lot more focus on the atmosphere and the environment. And it really added something to the game that a lot of other games weren't doing. Shadow of the Colossus took a much more simplistic approach to really the storytelling of the game. They didn't try to fill the world with a whole bunch of quests or with a bunch of monsters for you to fight. You only have to deal with 16, which are basically a boss fight in each one. It was very different, and it gave people something else. And it also just really seemed to revel in the scale and the scope of what was going on. And that's something that Nick seems to do as well when he's writing about it. He does go over the boss fights individually and kind of tells you the tactics he uses, but for the most part he's talking more about the emotional connection he has with the game and also just taking in the landscape of the game. He also mentions how you only see a small portion of the world in which Shadow of the Colossus takes place. And this is a really good thing for the game because it allows the player and it allows, for in this case, the reader of the book, to really fill in the holes with your imagination. You can kind of make up your own story as to how you got to where you are. It's just one of those fun things about, some video games that don't decide to explain in just excruciating detail every little bit about the world that you're playing in. Shadow of the Colossus lets you kind of create your own story. It's a lot of fun to do it, at least for me when I play a game like this. It's a lot of fun. Nick also does a bunch of interviews with the development team behind Shadow of the Colossus. And with that, you kind of get a little bit more about the world, a little more information, especially how it connects to the previous game, Ico. And it's explained that both take place in the same world, which makes me want to know even more, where, get some sort of locations, where do these two games take place, what is the relationship between the two of them, how exactly does Ico tie into Shadow of the Colossus, and vice versa. These are things you're not going to really get, which is sort of part of the mystery in the game, and also just one of those things that makes people want to keep studying it and just dig more into this really crazy world that we're allowed to look at. Through Nick's observations of these different boss fights and the journeys to get there, I also noticed kind of this weird theme where a lot of the Colossus, they're in a ruined city. Not all of them, but there's a decent number of them that are in a ruined city. They somehow have some connection with water, not all of them, but for the most part. And there's also electricity as well that goes into it. And that was something that I wish Nick had expanded on a little bit more, but I understand why he didn't. And maybe this was just me, but it seemed like his way of telling the story matched kind of the simplistic way that the game tells its story. And that's not anything bad. It works very, very well, both for the game and for this book, but it was something that I wish had been expanded on a little bit. Really, the last thing I want to point out is, while I found it interesting to read about what Nick says about the game, I found it a lot more interesting to read about what he thinks about while he's playing the game. Like how different parts of the game make him think about different parts of his own life. That was something that I thought was much more interesting than just reading a simple description of the game and just reading the history about the game. It sort of gives you that personal connection with the writer, and that's something I really found interesting and just really liked about this book. So now that I've read a bunch of the boss fight books, I have to say this one is up there with Philip Reed's Resident Evil and Mike Drucker's Silent Hill 2. This is a very good book, and if you're only going to read a few of the boss fight books, then definitely check this one out because it is really worth your time. So that's going to wrap it up, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please let me know what you think in the comments below, and have a great day, everybody.